This is Robert Herbin. Across 26 years as a player, then manager of Saint-Etienne, Herbin defined perhaps France's greatest ever club side. However, despite winning 16 major trophies, thanks to a Green Angel, a dearth of French success, and football's most controversial goal frame, Herbin and his team would be remembered for their most famous defeat. Swaggering and industrious in equal measure, Saint-Etienne captured French hearts during a string of improbable European comebacks in the mid-1970s. The Great Green Dynasty, however, spanned a quarter of a century and could be divided into two broad eras: Herbin the player and Herbin the coach. Before being surpassed by PSG in 2023, Saint-Etienne were Ligue 1's record champions with 10 titles. Herbin contributed to 9 of them, including a run of 8 in 13 years, between 1963 and 1976. A promising talent at Cavajal Nice, reigning French champions Saint-Etienne won the race to sign the 18-year-old Herbin in July 1957. Coach Jean Sneller would mentor the young Herbin, a tough but technically gifted defensive midfielder, throughout his career. Herbin later described their bond as a father-son relationship. Although Sneller led Saint-Etienne to their second title in 1964, it would be legendary coach Albert Batteux who would revolutionise the club. Batteux's attacking, flowing style, known as jeu à la Remoise or champagne football, had characterised his dominant Stade de Reims side of the 50s. Reims won 5 titles between 1953 and 1962, while losing 2 European Cup finals to Real Madrid in 1956 and 1959. Batteux would drop Herbin back into defence, allowing the now experienced campaigner to organise play from the back. It proved to be a turning point for both club and player, as Batteux's champagne football soon took hold. Prolific Malian goalscorer Salif Keita was added to complement the unpredictability of forward Rachid Mekloufi, as Saint-Etienne won 5 major trophies in 3 years. European success was not forthcoming, but reinforcements were on their way. Saint-Etienne also won the prestigious youth tournament, the Gambardella Cup, in 1970, thanks to an explosive generation of talent that would become the core of their next great team. The senior squad, meanwhile, were starting to be picked off by Marseille, who won the next 2 titles as Saint-Etienne slumped to 6th in 1972. Frustrated over those departures, Batteux's relationship with club president Roger Rocher deteriorated, resulting in his exit that summer. That same year, Herbin announced his retirement at just 33, citing a violent tackle from England's Nobby Stiles at the 1966 World Cup, which left him struggling to return to his best form. Now looking for a new manager, Rocher was desperate for Saint-Etienne fans who hailed from a working-class mining town to identify with their team. So central was that identity that it became tradition for players to visit the mines to help them understand the city and what it meant to play for the team. Needing a coach who understood that ethos, Rocher surprised everyone by appointing the rookie Herbin as Batteux's replacement. Herbin would build on Batteux's champagne football, which was often seen as a little lightweight, by injecting the ferocity of spirit characteristic of the city and its people into the team. "You have to take their breath away, grab them by the throat and play faster," Herbin later explained. Herbin also wanted the fittest team possible. One player described training as like going to work in a factory. Later on, Michel Platini, who joined in 1979, would vomit during early training sessions, such was the intensity. With Keita, Mekloufi, and French internationals Carnot and Bosquier, as well as Herbin, now all gone, the next generation were given the chance to flourish. Most notably, midfielder Jacques Santini, forward Patrick Rivelli, and centre-back Christian Lopez were promoted from the youth ranks. All would go on to play for France. Herbin's new-look Saint-Etienne proved close to unstoppable, winning 6 major domestic trophies in 4 years, including a hat-trick of league titles and 3 French Cups. But it was in Europe that Saint-Etienne and Herbin's legendary status would be confirmed. Central to the club's success was another academy graduate, forward Dominique Rocheteau. Pacey, skillful and a clinical finisher with a hard-nosed panache, the swaggering Rocheteau, known as the Green Angel, quickly became Herbin's attacking fulcrum. Complementing seasoned striker Hervé Rivelli, the club's top scorer in all 7 of their title-winning campaigns between 1967 and 1976. Saint-Etienne were now a major threat in Europe, especially at the Stade Geoffroy Guichard, where a furnace-like atmosphere lent the ground its nickname, the Cauldron. Incredibly, Saint-Étienne's unbeaten run there would extend to over 4 years. And some typically boisterous nights at Le Cauldron helped Saint-Etienne overcome first leg deficits to Hajduk Split and Roots Hortsov in the 74-75 European Cup campaign before a narrow semi-final defeat to eventual champions Bayern Munich. Urban and Saint-Etienne's most famous win, however, would follow in next season's quarter-final. 2-0 down from the first leg against a much-fancied Dynamo Kiev side featuring legendary forward Oleg Blokhin and influential coach Valery Lobanovsky, Saint-Etienne roared to a 3-0 second-leg home win. The game is most remembered for Lopez's last-ditch tackle on Blokhin to start a counter-attack from which Rivelli scored the opener. Amid Le Cauldron's pandemonium, Urban would remain characteristically calm and watchful on the bench, prompting the French press to nickname him the Sphinx. A narrow win over PSV Eindhoven in the last 4 set up a final with Bayern Munich. In a long fallow period for French football, Urban's team had come to represent not just their city, but all of France. After Batteux had led France to the World Cup semi-finals in 1958, France only qualified for one of the next 4 World Cups and failed to make it beyond the group stages again until 1982. Saint-Etienne were perhaps the only real bright point across 3 decades of underachievement. And with all of France watching, the 1976 European Cup final at Hampden Park was to be their crowning achievement. The game itself didn't go to plan, however. At 0-0, Santini and Dominic Bettene both struck the frame of the goal. The Hampden Park posts and bar, however, were square rather than the usual rounded shape, and Saint-Etienne fans insist to this day that both shots would have been deflected in had the posts been rounded rather than bounce out. Saint-Etienne were further hamstrung by an injury to key man Rocheteau, limiting him to just 7 minutes in the final. With the French champions unable to find a breakthrough, Bayern midfielder Franz Roth's second-half goal won the game and the European Cup for Munich. Despite the defeat, Saint-Etienne remained firmly in the hearts of the French public and were welcomed home as heroes before being paraded down the Champs-Élysées as if they were champions. Les Poteaux Carrés, or the square posts, have since taken on an almost religious significance to Saint-Etienne fans. Having stood undisturbed at Hampden Park for 84 years, the posts were finally replaced in 1987, and Saint-Etienne eventually paid €20,000 to bring them home in 2013. The crossbar now sits in the club's museum. A quarter-final defeat to eventual winners Liverpool the following season and the rise of Nantes at home meant the square post final became Urban's team's zenith. After one final title in 1981 with a team led by Michel Platini and Johnny Rep, Urban, like Batteux before him, would fall out with Rocher and exit in 1983, ending his quarter of a century at the club. Urban and Batteux's influence, however, shouldn't be underestimated. All 10 of the French players used by Urban in the 1976 final, many of whom were club youth products, would play for France. Several of those who played under Urban would contribute to France's 1980s rejuvenation, which saw Les Bleus win Euro 84 and make it to the 1982 and 1986 World Cup semi-finals. France's 1998 World Cup winning coach Aimé Jacquet was also a Saint-Etienne disciple, having spent 13 years at the club playing under both Batteux and Urban. Although usually unsentimental, Urban later conceded that the square post final continued to haunt him, saying, "It deeply affected me. The wound is not healed. I still dream about it." Nevertheless, despite the lack of a European trophy, Urban and Batteux remain the most influential and one of the most successful duos in French football history, and are the root of much of Les Bleus' more recent successes. Just imagine if the posts had been round.